Well, you're live. Oh, we're live. I'm live. You're live on Coffee with Kim. It's so good to be with you today as we go through some U.S.-Israel news and take a deep dive. Well, I don't know how deep we're going to dive today, but we're going to take a look at some U.S.-Israel news like we always do. But we're going to also take a look at some very, very interesting biblical prophecies that have been, acknowledged, let's put it that way, over the last few days. And we're going to be taking a look at China. I haven't talked about China. I did say, I think a week or two ago, I was going to spend a little time talking about China. So we'll kind of piecemeal some things together today. All right, Kathy, it's so good to see you. And let's see, Benjamin. Hey, Benjamin, great to see you. So it's so good to have all of you with me today. And so let's get started. Let's get started with, okay. All right, here we are. All right. Let's get started probably with one of the top news articles that's floating through the news here in Israel and, of course, in the United States. And that is Jeffrey Epstein's suicide and all the unanswered questions. I'll be honest, I don't remember who it was after, we took note of, might have been Jack, but anyways, after we took note of the fact that he had been arrested, someone said to me, or someone texted in our group, yeah, if he stays alive, the Clintons don't get him. And that seems to be the as they say, the conspiracy theory that is filtering around. However, it's interesting, when you see this happen, somebody is found, hanging themselves in the prison, or in prison. The first thing that should come to many that have ever watched NCIS, oh my, here they are, Dr. Mallory always saying to Jethro, this wasn't a suicide. Take a look here. If it was a suicide, they would have hung this way and not that way. And it was murder. So that, of course, is floating around Jeffrey Epstein's suicide. Allegations for Jeffrey Epstein are severe. And he's been in and out of the news for a long time now. Along with the Clintons. I mean, very good friends with the Clintons and several other very prominent individuals that have taken private, on his private plane to his private island, which, is always described as some type of living orgy going on. And of late, a part of a very big sex slave trade organizations. So these are the allegations against Epstein. A couple of very interesting developments with those that have been alleged to be named in the 2,000-page release of the interrogation of Jeffrey Epstein. I assume that's what that was. So anyways, we find, I'll just read you a couple things from this article here in Israel. It says, on Saturday, the same day we learned that Jeffrey Epstein had committed suicide, major media reported on new details of the disgraced financier's inner circle. The reports about Epstein are always of the sort that make you want to turn away when reading them. Details from court documents always seem to get worse each time. with women claiming that as young teens they were treated as slaves, sent to have sex with powerful men, and subjected to abusive whims. So this is, of course, what he's going to go down. This is his legacy. I thought of the old adage today, the wages of sin are death, period. So whether he committed suicide, unlikely, very unlikely, by the way, or he was murdered, more likely, but probably very unlikely to come to the surface, because if I was going to actually rabbit trail right now, I would just take Jeffrey Epstein. Now the FBI's involvement, he's getting a lot of coverage, of which neither of the shootings got this kind of coverage. I am not a friend. Well, I'm not going to say it's not a friend or a foe. I'm not a foe or a friend. But I have to tell you, I am very, very upset with the FBI right now. And I did a lot of research when I was writing my book, Unraveling the Washington Web, and I did stumble across some things that I chose not to put in my book because both the FBI and the CIA are, considered very honorable parts of government, very important and very honorable parts of government in the United States. And one of the things that we try to do, unlike a lot of programs out there or a lot of lives out there, is we have absolutely no desire to disparage organizations, people, places, things at all. However, we do desire to really, call things out according to truth. And again, there was a very, very interesting article in the Jerusalem Post today. However, regarding the national security issue over the two killings. And I'm not going to highlight that article. However, I read that article, and once again, people are really deflecting the real issue, the real question, and that is why. If this is an inside group of people, inside of the FBI, inside of the CIA, that are progressive in nature, democratic, hate the president, and are intentionally not calling attention to websites and call-ins. I mean, we have from the Parkland shooter, mass shooting in Florida, friends had called the FBI, parents had called the FBI, and no one took an initiative. Well, I am sure we have a very, very similar problem here with both El Paso and Dayton, Ohio. And if you don't heed when there's open source evidence floating around, which is websites, chatter, and you don't heed when individuals are calling in and saying, this individual's a threat, this is what's going on, this is what we're hearing, this is what they are saying personally, and you are in charge of the national security of the United States of America, then somebody needs to be looking in on what you're doing, because you are not a faithful American, and you are not concerned about the citizens of America. And you see, if that's the case, then you have no right holding a public office. You have no right working in the CIA, the FBI, the White House, the State Department, Congress, Senate, the judicial leg, the Supreme Court. If you don't have Americans and the life of an American citizen at the forefront of everything you say and do in office, then you have no right operating or holding or obtaining a paycheck from the United States government. It's that simple. And so I think somebody needs to investigate. And, you know, a lot of people have been taken out already since President Trump came to power, who are not and do not have America as at the source of their best interest. All right, they have other agendas. So I'm still really upset with the and the connection is what to Jeffrey Epstein? All right, the connection is how much will we ever really learn about him, and how much will be covered up. Even though I don't think it was a wise decision to release these 2,000 pages, that was actually challenged, and whatever liberal judge released it, and I'm sure it was. You know, there is just some things, until you know the end of the story, you've done the investigation in full, there are things that should not be released to the public because they can be misconstrued, or since you don't have the whole story, they can indict people that are not even eligible or connected to the story, just because they were, you know, being interviewed over different issues. So very, very disconcerting situation. Anyways, hello everyone. It's so good to see you, Angel. I just stretched my neck. Catherine, it's so good to see you. Linda, good to see you guys. Ricky, hey Ricky, it is so good to see you. Jack, all right. What do you call people when you're able to pull off a murder like Epstein? Oh, you know, he's like into the Illuminati. Well, I think he just called him the Clintons. I don't know. All right. So, all right, Crystal. All right. Where did he? Well, I mean, Crystal, it's a great question. Where did he get his money from? And wasn't the UN involved with sex trafficking as well? Yeah, absolutely. The UN has been found to be involved as well. And where do people get their money? When you have any kind of, very honestly, any kind of illegal or questionably legal operation, there's a lot of money involved in that, Crystal. And in this case, he was running a technically legal porn island, however, just replete with tentacles of very illegal and very disturbing activity. So they sell these women hundreds and thousands of dollars. They'll sell them. And of course, he gets his cut and others get their cut, and the money starts rolling. It's like how the cocaine, you ever see the movie American Made? If you haven't, it's a great movie about how the cocaine industry got started here in America. And it's very interesting how it got started. You wouldn't believe how it got started. If you haven't seen the movie, you got to check it out, because you know, public enemy number one in this case was a division of the government. So very, very interesting. Speaking of that, I am going to be checking out, there's a couple of things I'll put up, a couple of must-sees if you have Netflix. There is a movie now on Netflix. I think it's supposed to be the launch of a potential pilot, a potential series, but it's a 2-hour movie called The Red Sea Diving Resort. And that is about how Israel was able to get a lot of the Ethiopian Jews back to Israel. That is before they actually went and lifted them by plane. But this was the initial effort to bring the Ethiopian Jews back to Israel. Incredible movie. So you want to take a look at that. But there's a movie coming out that is extremely disturbing. It's called The Hunt. And so I'm not taking a look at the movie. I barely watch things like this, and I have such a sensitive conscience that I can't watch anything that is awful. But I am going to take a look at what is behind it, because I've gotten several people alerting me of this particular movie that could release a lot of antagonism towards the conservative sector of America. So we're going to take a look at that and let you know. All right. So anyways, Crystal, hopefully that answered. Jonathan, hey, how are you? It is so good to see you today. Great to have you watching. Look forward to being in touch. All right. Anyways, yeah, the Clintons don't have a great record for that. Hi, David Trammell, my friend. Thank you so much. I hope your wife is here with you. Jack, so good to see you. Shelley, great to see you as well. James, so good to see you. Melinda. All right. Pastor Happy Hadamon, Mark Hadamon, thank you. Good to see you. It's always good to see you. All right. So everybody, Angel, and again, Ricky, so good to see you. All right, Kathy. All right, everybody. So it's great. Now, where I want to go from there today, I just, sometimes I just pick a topic just while everybody's getting on. I want to talk about China today. I want to talk about something interesting. I haven't spent any time, but China seems to be dominating Israel's news today. HK protesters undeterred by Beijing's hard stance. All right. And then we have Australia. Now this is interesting. Australia's coalition splits over China Nazi comments. We've got some very interesting things happening with North Korea. And every time we do joint maneuvers with South Korea, North Korea always acts out. So I'll mention that in a minute. So in addition to this, the big news over the last couple of weeks with China has been the developments in the South China Sea, especially with the Philippines. Big news last week. And in my book, Unraveling the Washington Web, I actually talk about China and the 9-dash line. And I talk about the boundaries, and the 9-dash line was really a kind of a contract, a treaty that noted that China had laid claim to approximately 85% of the maritime boundaries of the South China Sea, existing since 1947. So these maritime boundaries that China has now recently laid claim to since 1947 has been known as the China 9-dash line. These are the maritime boundaries, all right, of the South China Sea. Now, the coordinates of the 9-dash line boundaries China claims are not yet public. So China, let me rephrase that. That probably didn't come out right. Okay, so China, the maritime boundaries that were set in did I say 1947? Yes. Okay. The maritime boundaries that were set, China has actually created or challenged, all right, which is about 85% of those boundaries in a document called the China 9-dash line. Now, this was not published, and China was and has been known over the last couple administrations to be encroaching on the maritime boundaries that were set in 1947. And so they say, well, this is part of their project, the 9-dash line. All right, so that's the background in that. So what's happening now is that China has sent, now this is a lesson, folks, and I'm a lesson, and I'll tell you in what, in just 1 second. All right, China has sent warships and research vessels, all right, into the waters that are claimed by the Philippines. And so the Philippine Defense Secretary, Delfin Lorenzana, all right, has asked Beijing to explain their activities of late on why these China research vessels are there and warships that are there. Now, what some of you might not be aware of is that the president, Rodrigo Duterte, all right, even though he is due to visit Beijing very, very soon, he himself, all right, is calling out President Xi, okay, and China's failure, all right, to be in compliance with the arbitration ruling that, okay, China is now in Philippine territory, and he said that the act of China has resulted in unlawful acts of intimidation and bullying in the South China Sea. So China is very upset because the Philippines has also come to Chinese President Xi and told him of their plans to drill for oil in what China sees as the disputed waters. Now, this has been going on since 2016. All right, and so President Xi said, if the Philippines persists in drilling for oil, there is going to be trouble. So you can just guess why these research ships are there and the warships. They don't want the Philippines drilling for oil. And in addition to that, China has this agenda called the 9-dash line, which is to take over the maritime boundaries and islands that they feel belong to them and have been unlawfully delegated to these other countries since 1947. So this is little old China and its state with the Philippines. The problem here is that the president of the Philippines did not take a firm stance when he had the opportunity. In fact, he took a position of appeasement. And when he took a position of appeasement and actually even took the problem in the direction of arbitration, China saw this as weakness and did what every powerful nation will do when they have an agenda of encroachment. What they will do when they see appeasement is they will move forward. They will exercise their strength and power. And, you know, a lot of leaders, because they don't want to engage other national or international leaders for, they don't want to be in any kind of real contentious situation, they will often capitulate on this point or that point. We saw this even under the leadership of President Obama. When you see capitulation, then what begins to happen when you start to back off and you do not face your enemy or competing nations face to face in negotiation over important issues, then what will happen is one will come out on top, and they will encroach upon your boundaries. This is true on an individual basis. It is true on an international basis. We see this if you look at how Russia has gained so much territory in a lot of its nuclear expansion over the last just 10 years. It is because no national leader has wanted to stand up to Putin until recently. And so you see, once again, that if indeed the Philippines, and now, of course, I'll finish that statement in a minute. I mean, now the U.S., the Ronald Reagan, our warship is in those waters right now on behalf of the Philippines, because that is an ally. And I'm not going to say that the Philippines might not have needed us there if they would have stepped up to the plate, or the president would have stepped up to the plate in the very beginning stages of China's encroachment, or said, this is what we're going to do. We're not going to ask your permission. These are our waters. Much of the same way that this is what Israel does. This is ours, this is what belongs to us, and this is what we're going to do. Of course, there's a lot of pushback at times, but when you know the truth, you have to act on it. And if he would have done that, I think the very unsettling situation that is now developing in the China South Sea with the Philippines may have been thwarted, or at least on a much more equitable playing table, or equitable negotiating table, not a playing table, but negotiating table, than it is at this point. And of course now, once you bring in the United States, now it's a real power standoff. So very interesting developments that have been taking place, and this is why in the China South Sea, in addition to the Philippines, China research vessels have leave Vietnam after a standoff. China's Marine Survey vessel Haiying DZ-8 departed Vietnam's exclusive economic zone last Wednesday after a tense standoff. The ship entered waters near Vietnam-controlled Vanguard Bank and the Spratly Islands in early July. Its stated purpose was to conduct a study of the ocean floor, but it also blocked a Vietnamese oil exploration project and was protected by Chinese Coast Guard ships equipped with guns and helicopters. Vietnam responded by sending its own Coast Guard vessels to follow the Chinese surveying ship, creating a standoff not seen since May of 2014, when Chinese and Vietnamese vessels confronted each other when China's national oil company moved an exploratory oil platform into the waters of Vietnam, into the waters that Vietnam considers its own territory. All right, let's move. All right, let me just say this. Vietnam had demanded China remove the survey ship from the Vanguard Bank, which it says lies within Vietnam's 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone. I've talked about that in the future over the last few years, how that plays off. We have that issue here in Israel. You have boundaries within, I think it's 12 kilometers, these very close boundaries, and then you have what is called the nautical mile, which extends 200 nautical miles or 370 kilometers from your shores, which is considered the economic zone of your country. And this holds true, of course, in every country that is on maritime water or has maritime water boundaries. Okay, so the U.S. carrier sails through the South China Sea. A U.S. aircraft carrier sailed through the disputed South China Sea in the latest show of America's military might amid new territorial flare-ups involving China and 3 rival claimant states. So let's just give you a little rundown on the Ronald Reagan. It is a nuclear-powered USS Ronald Reagan, launched and recovered members of its complement of 70 supersonic FA-18 jets, spy planes, and helicopters while steaming toward Manila for a port visit, which is where I believe it is right now. Armed cruisers kept watch a few kilometers away from the carrier. Rear Admiral Carl Thomas told journalists that the American military presence helps provide security and stability to foster diplomatic talks among rival claimant nations in the South China Sea. He made the comment when asked what message the warship presence was sending in tensions involving China and rival claimants Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, Brunei, and Philippines over long contested maritime space. And so Thomas said, we just think that folks should follow the international law and our presence allows to provide the security and stability in the background for these discussions to take place. There you have it, folks. This is what's going on in China, with China right now in the South China Sea, as they try to push or very subtly, put in motion once again their so-called 9-line, the China 9-line agenda. Let's just put it that way. Anyways, I write about it in my book, and especially the Asian pivot with the Obama-Clinton agenda for Asia back in 2016. All right, so on that note, there you go. Betty, it's good to see you. Renee, it's great to see you. Timothy, it's good to see you. Mary, it's great to see you. Sai, oh, it's so good to see you. All right, Benjamin, would I ever consider coming to the States to teach? I've been in the States teaching all my life, Benjamin. Now I'm here, but yes, when I come into the States, I do teach. I just actually got an invitation to another country today. So anyways, I would love to, Benjamin, when I come into the States. Okay, now, so speaking of that, let me just say one more thing about China. A very interesting development in Australia. Reuters noted that there was a split that has opened in Australia's ruling coalition government over a lawmaker's comparison of the rise of China to that of Nazi Germany. Conservative MP Andrew Hastie, I believe, a former Special Forces soldier, wrote an op-ed on Thursday for Channel 9 newspapers comparing the rise of China as an unnoticed existential threat to that of Nazi Germany, prompting a mixed reaction from colleagues and swift condemnation from Beijing. Hastie is not a minister, but an influential member of Australia's ruling Liberal National Coalition, and is the chairman of Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee, which is privy to classified information. His column outlined the dangers of not comprehending China's ideological motivation for building ports and roads, arguing the West had wrongly calculated the economic liberalization in China that ultimately it would lead to democratization. Powerful ministers, including Attorney General Christian Porter and Finance Minister Matthias Cormann, criticized Hastie's column, while Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton defended it and Prime Minister Scott Morrison remained neutral. This is an interesting read. I'll see if I can get it up on Coffee with Kim, because you want to always listen to men that are in places or positions where they actually have the opportunity to read and to observe what is not public or not made, the public is not aware of. You always want to listen to their position statements. Now, I don't know that I would align them with the Nazi Party, but it did cause me to ask a question. A question I have to tell you, I don't think I have ever asked before. And that is China in the Bible? So, is China in the Bible? So I did a little bit of a research on this, and what appeared was a very, very interesting article. And I'm going to I got to always remember to write these down, write what I say down, right? I forget to do it. But I want to put up on CWK, this article, Is China in the Bible? Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this. However, this is a really, really interesting article. It was written in December 2010, asking the question, of course, is China in the Bible, and will China become the world's next superpower? Now, in this very interesting article, you go through some history of China, in particular, the history of the Mongols. Now, we know there is a lot of history with the Mongols, all right? But the Han, the Mongols, and another group, let me just see if I can pull that up. The other group is called... I think a family named Kittim, all right? I believe that's it. So interestingly, this article aligns the Mongolian race with the son of Japhet, Noah's son Japheth. This is a race that has come out of the line of Japhet, and he says that we have the people of the East, Japhet, and when you go into Ezekiel 38, the Mongolian race, he says, is akin to the relationship between the Mongolian race, which is now a big segment of China, and Russia. And it is therefore Magog. Very interesting article. So I'm not going to, and he draws from Josephus's writings, which is also very, very interesting, the great historian Josephus. In fact, let me just read a little bit of this. It says here, Jewish historian Josephus indicated where Magog's descendants settled. He wrote in the 1st century, Magog founded those that from him were named Magogites, but who are by the Greeks called Scythians. So this is in the complete work of Josephus. In a prophecy in Ezekiel 38, the Bible labels this vast territory of northern Eurasia where the Scythes lived, a region that stretched from Russia steppes east into modern-day China and Mongolia. And this is cited in Ezekiel 38 as Magog. So this territory contained many different tribes of people of white and yellow races, all of whom were called the Scyths or Scythians by the Greeks. And the Ezekiel 38 prophecy demonstrates this as well, listing numerous nations and peoples associated with or dwelling in the land of Magog. The people who most prominently settled this land are typically identified as Mongolic and Turkic. The name Mongol is even derived from the name Magog. So very interesting. So let me just also, what was interesting is this author's connection to the term that is in Isaiah 23:1 about the land of Chittim. So he says, to which modern nation does this end time prophecy apply? And that is, the biblical name refers to both the island of Cyprus and to the nation of China, whose progenitors first populated Cyprus and gave it its name. Jewish historian Josephus records that some descendants of Japhet, such as the families of Gomer, Tubal, and Togarmah, first settled in southern Europe before migrating east into Asia. Kittim was one such family, originally settling lands to the west of Mesopotamia before moving to the Far East. Genesis 10:4 lists the sons of Japhet, Japhet's fourth-born son. The sons of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. Kittim is synonymous with the Chittim in Isaiah's prophecy. Another very interesting connection. So let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, this was interesting right here. It says the descendants of Yavan's son Kittim came to Asia sometime after many of their cousins had already settled there. And their migration through Central Asia, the Kittim made their appearance in modern-day northern China and Mongolia under the name Khitan in the 4th century BC, let's see, all right, CE, okay, Common Era. So, in the 10th century, the Khitan, in the 4th century CE, in the 10th century, the Khitan people managed to create a dynasty that subjugated the peoples, including the Chinese, in modern-day northern China. Their territory stretched from what is now Korea to eastern Kazakhstan, including Beijing, the seat of the government in China today. So, and also, this was very interesting. China was called, back in the day, it was called Cathay after the Khitans, which is also then the Kittim, which is the Chittim in Isaiah chapter, what did he say? 23 verse 1. So Isaiah 23, 1 through 3 reveals that Chittim, which can be modern day China according to this author, will form a part of a global economic market along with Europe, one that is prophesied to shut out the nations of Israel. It should be, it's probably supposed to be the nation of Israel or the nations that are connected to Israel. It should be no surprise that China will be an integral part of this economic partnership with Europe and is now the world's greatest exporter. The two trading blocs will soon dominate the global economy. Okay, so this was written in 2010. And then Han. So then you you have another very interesting character, and then you have in this article archaeological proof, and back to Gog and Magog, which includes the kings of the east, as noted in Daniel 11, where the clash is foretold between the king of the north, a German-led European power, and the king of the south, a radical Islamic power led by Iran. Emerging victorious, the European army is then prophesied to conquer the tiny Jewish nation called Israel. At that point, verse 44, for it tells tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble this European king. And boom. Oh, then everything, and then I guess in the book of Revelations 9:16, it also says this event is further expounded in Revelations, where it is prophesied that the kings of the east will gather an army that numbers 200 million soldiers. Many have quoted on that. Such a vast army could only be assembled by China. So back to the original question, will China become the world's next dominating superpower? And will there be a decline in the U.S.? And this author goes on to say no. It will not become a dominating superpower in place of the United States. And then he goes on to quote Ezekiel 38:33, where it says, where God says, thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am Adonai, I am the Lord. So China will not win out on its agenda, according to this article. Very, very interesting. I will put this up on Coffee with Kim. You can read it and mull over it and let me know what you think about it. But it led me all of these developments, and of course China being very close to Russia, very close to North Korea, very involved even what Israel is doing, rebuilding the old Silk Road, which all of that is also very, very biblical. It just was natural for me to ask the question, is China really in the Bible? And I really haven't given this a whole lot of thought, but I will say it was an interesting read. All right, that's enough about China. We're probably running out of time. All right, Christian, good to see you. Lila, good to see you. Betty, so good to see you. So great to see you. Renee, good to see you. Timothy, Mary, good to see everybody. All right, okay, now, all right, so that leads us, of course, to talk about, I guess we're really on to a lot of Bible stuff. Tisha B'Av was just, you don't really celebrate Tisha B'Av. For those of you, I really didn't talk about it much last week. I did bring it up a couple of times, but Tisha B'Av is celebrated, I don't want to say celebrated, is honored. All right, it's a day in the Jewish calendar that has been noted. We're going back to Babylonian days when Judah was carried away by Babylon. That mourning took place over the destruction of the temple since that time. And then, of course, the second temple was destroyed on the very same day by the Romans on the month of Av, the Hebrew month of Av, which is what we're in, the 9th of Av. The temple was destroyed. There was definitely other very, very sad, there's so many, the list is like this long, very sad things that have developed on this particular day, but it's always a day when there's a lot of great consternation, a lot of things happening. In addition to that, Israel and the Jewish people worldwide are in mourning over the state or the fact that the temple was destroyed. And in addition to that, it's not just about mourning. now that the nation of Israel is reestablished, and now that there is the potential opportunity for the third temple, it is also a day of longing. It is a day of hope. It is a day of really looking to prophecy, where God is going to raise up the third temple. The Mashiach will come, and there will be redemption, not only for the Jewish people and the land of Israel, but for the world. So there's a lot behind this day. Well, I had the opportunity to go to the Kotel on Saturday night, and so after Shabbat, before Shabbat was over, actually, I went to the Kotel and ushered in the Shabbat, or in Motzei Shabbat, which was the honoring of, it was the Tisha B'Av, when everybody fasts. It is a fast day. Many of the government facilities, or all of them, are shut down on this day here in Israel, and really the majority of the country, especially in the religious, fast and pray and mourn. I mean, this is, you read about mourning in the Bible. You read about the collective conscience of mourning, how God calls the nation to mourning. You see how Mordecai, when he heard the Jewish people were going to be annihilated by Haman, he called Esther to call the nation into mourning, into fasting, into prayer. So this is a very modern day incident that has been going on for thousands of years, but it is something to really experience. To go and to sit at the Kotel on the ground, because you're in mourning, and in Jewish tradition, you're sitting shiva, you do not sit at the same height that you would sit at a table that is a place of communion and rejoicing and joy, but you sit low, and you're in a place of mourning. So everybody was sitting on the ground. I was sitting with thousands. I mean, there are thousands, but probably thousands actually. There were thousands there, but I was on the ground sitting with probably 100 or so young girls in the women's section of the prayer. And we were all just singing really beautiful melodies in conjunction with the event, and praying, and it was just a very moving moment. And then as I was leaving, it was about midnight, I was walking back. I happened to, down at the Cardell, which is another old Roman area of the Jewish quarter, there was, I don't know, maybe about 150 to 100, probably close, young yeshiva boys, young men, singing. Oh, to your ears, it was magnificent, but it was in light of the evening, and we all just stood there all together, a couple hundred people at least, singing with them, and really connecting in the collective conscience of the nation with the hope and the longing for the coming of the Messiah and the rebuilding of the third temple, as well as mourning the past. And there is something to be connected, because if you will connect to your past, you will be able to change the future. But if you forget the past, you will not be able to accurately assess the present, and you will not be able to change the future. And so it's so good to be part of a nation that remembers the past, so we can move forward into the future and accurately assess the present. All right, so with that said, why this year was Tisha B'Av so notable? Well, one of the reasons for that was the sighting of foxes at the southern temple steps near the mounts on the day of and right before Tisha B'Av, which was actually Friday, these foxes were seen playing. Now, this is really amazing because, and I'm going to read this very sketchily, you will see foxes mentioned, like in the Song of Songs, they're mentioned, catch us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, for our vineyard is in blossom. And then we see also in the book of Lamentations, where it actually says that foxes will be playing on the Temple Mount that has been left as a wasteland. All right? But it's extremely interesting to all that observe this because of something that was written in the Talmud 2,000 years ago. So 2,000 years ago, there was in the Talmud, it's actually in what's called Makot. This is a tractate, 24b. It says, this was the scenario that was written. Rabban Gamliel, very well-known rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, and Rabbi Joshua and Rabbi Akiva went up to Jerusalem. When they reached the Temple Mount, they saw a fox emerging from the place of the Holy of Holies. The others started weeping, but Rabbi Akiva laughed. Rabbi Akiva asked the rabbis why they cried, and they explained that to see a wild animal in such a holy place, a place which was forbidden to unfit men, was distressing. Rabbi Akiva noted that this was precisely the reason he laughed. He explained that the fact that the prophecy of Uriah, related by the prophet Micah, had come to be was proof that the prophecy of Zechariah would also come to be. So what was the prophecy in Micah? Assuredly, because of you, Zion shall be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps of ruins, and the Har Habayit, which is the mount, okay, a shrine in the woods. So it would be destroyed, okay? So Micah prophesied the destruction of the Temple Mount. And on the flip side of that, the prophet Zechariah described the return of Jerusalem to its days of glory. And so it says in Zechariah, I believe it's 8:4-5, it says here, and thus says in the English, the Lord of hosts, there shall yet be old men and women in the squares of Jerusalem, each with staff in hand because of their great age, and the squares of the city shall be crowded with boys and girls playing. Now, if you go into the old city today, into the Jewish quarter, this is precisely what you will see. So, as the focus of Jewish prayer and the site of the future temple, the Temple Mount has frequently been seen as a scene of prophetic images. So, this was one, the fact that foxes were playing there brought all of these passages. Even a passage in Ezekiel also talking about some very interesting things. You know what? I really want to go there, but I think I'm going to just pass that for time's sake today. Very, very interesting in connection with these foxes. Chapter 8 of Zechariah, also connected. So it was seen that we are now in that process, which we've known since 1967 specifically, that these foxes were once again a sign that the promises in Zechariah and the prophecies in Ezekiel about the rebuilding of the temple and the restoration of the nation in Jerusalem are indeed in process of being completely fulfilled. So very interesting. I will also put this article up. I know that Linda has already put an article, very, very good article up, but I want this one because it also brings to our attention not only this, also a prophetic fulfillment in July of 2018. And I think he mentions, not here, but I did read it in another couple of articles, several other fulfillments. So let me make sure I put this article up as well. All right. So how's everybody doing tonight? We've talked about Epstein. We've talked about China in depth, what it's doing in the South China Sea. I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Greatest Showman, but he happened to inherit a bunch of shipping vessels that had sunk deep in the South China Sea. All right, Darla, good to see you. Nicole, great to see you. Hey, Nicole, are you coming with Denise? Let me know. Christina Constantine, good to see you as well. So it's great to see everybody. All right. There's so much other stuff we can talk about, but I think we've covered probably two of, I don't know, let's see if I can go all the way. I don't know if I can. Let's see if I can. Once you're on it, no, I can't see everything I wrote that we would talk about today. But anyways, I think that we've pretty much covered the foxes, we've covered China, we've covered Epstein, and anything else in the paper that I wanted to cover. There's some things on cybersecurity. It's kind of a boring day, actually. I'm going to have to cover the upcoming elections pretty soon, but apart from China, it's kind of nothing really new in the news today. So, all right, everybody, it's been great being with you. Remember to support this channel and what we're doing now on YouTube and across the board. So there's a link to be able to do that, or if it's not up, we'll put it up. All right, and we look forward to seeing you, and we'll see you tomorrow. I don't know what we're going to talk about tomorrow, but I am sure the news will tell us what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. All right, everybody, it's been great seeing you, and you have an awesome day. This is the beginning of an amazing week, and we are going to talk about amazing things this week. So, all right, everybody, stay safe in America. Stay safe in Israel too, but stay safe in America. And remember, pray for America. I am going to end with this thought. So going through this connection with the foxes and Tisha B'Av and the prophecy of the third temple, I came across in Ezekiel chapter 13 the calling out of false prophets that, kind of going back like to the days of Chamberlain, where it says there will be peace in our day. The false prophets were prophesying all of this peace, and that we aren't going to the temple's not going to be destroyed, and we aren't going to see all these horrible things happen. Of course, they were doing it. Ezekiel called them out, and he said, "Listen. This was the problem. Everybody was believing all these people when someone like we just read about the Australian intelligence leader who's saying something different than the international community is saying regarding China. Nobody wants to listen to them. And then Ezekiel gets right into the face of his audience, and he says, here's why. Here's the real problem. Nobody wanted to go and stand in the gap for the nation of Israel. And the only interesting part about that with Ezekiel is he really didn't align that to them. I don't know if I can even see it. I don't even know if I have it here to be able to, let me just, yeah. What's interesting is this. I'm gonna read this. He says, "Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, prophesy against the prophets of Israel who prophesy, and say to those who prophesy with their own inspiration, listen to the word of Adonai, the word of the Lord. Thus says Adonai Elohim, the Lord God, woe to the foolish prophets who are following their own spirit and have seen nothing." And then verse 4 says, "O Israel, your prophets have been like foxes among ruins. You have not gone up into the breaches, nor did you build the wall around the house of Israel to stand in the battle on the day of Adonai, on the day of the Lord. They see falsehood and lying divinations, who are saying, the Lord declares, when the Lord has not sent them, yet they hope for fulfillment of their word." And it goes on. But this whole thing, he calls out, he says, instead of going in and going up into the breaches, and it says, nor did you build the wall around the house of Israel to stand in the day of battle. So he really, even if we go back to that day, we can go back to even during the time of Ahab and Jezebel, because there was, of course, so many false prophets in that time, which ultimately led to the first destruction of the first temple. And they did the same thing, that he's, here with the destruction of the second temple, we see very, very similar teaching and speaking. However, the problem always has been, who's standing in the gap? Who's building the wall, the connection to God? Who is in prayer? And this is so clear when you read the writings of, maybe not right here, but when you put it all together, it says, build the wall around the house of Israel so they would be able to stand. And you'll see, actually, I'm not prepared. I'll just be honest, I'm not prepared to give a trail. I don't want to go into talking about that today, because I'm not prepared with the proper alignment of passages in the book of Ezekiel and the book of Isaiah and Yeshayahu and Yeskel and Zechariah and so on, and Yoel. I mean, you have to be really prepared if you're going to go through and give. But very, very interesting. He says, like foxes, they were hiding in holes, and they weren't preparing for battle, and they weren't preparing so that they would be able to stand against the enemy in the day. And so how do we first prepare for that? Well, a nation prepares, a nation that believes in the Torah, a nation that believes in God, they first prepare through prayer. And then they prepare through executing proper judgment, righteousness, and justice. So there you have it. Steph, good to see you. All right, Darla. All right, everybody. I'm getting way out of my league. Okay, so I hope everybody has a great day today. Again, we're going to have an amazing week, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye, everyone.